one of the things I love talking about, because it's apropos in life, not just acting, is at some point we got to kind of look at that fear and change it from a negative thing to a positive thing.
Yeah, yes,
Because
I'm glad you
nerves,
said that.
people
Yes.
complain all the time about nerves. It's like, well, I'm like literally shaking, like the page is shaking in front of me when I'm auditioning, and they're going to see that and they're going to know that I'm an amateur. It's like every celebrity I've ever worked with, every single celebrity I've ever worked, and I've worked with a ton and huge ones, they all get nervous. They all have that same anxiety, but you just change it to, oh, good. The nervousness is there. Great. Then I'm ready to go.
Disinformation is spreading.
There will be a surprise outbreak. Is the issue of pandemic.
No social distancing at all.
They said that they would express their concerns about the mask supply.
Where's the mask? Where's the glove?
A second wave is...
We all need some good news.
A message for all the healthcare workers out there.
Thank you.
If you're looking for hope tonight, raise your hand. If you feel alone and don't understand, if you're fighting the fight of your life, then stand.
Mark Atteberry is a Renaissance man in the truest sense of the word. From his humble beginnings growing up on a dairy farm in Sonoma County, California, to a 30-year career in entertainment as an award-winning actor, director, renowned photographer, entrepreneur, and acting coach, Mark's versatility is truly remarkable. Mark began his career as a professional musician, playing both trombone and keyboards, and after graduating from Biola University with a degree in music, traveling the country and playing in numerous pit orchestras when the acting bug bit, and he made the transition to stage, film, and television. Mark also owns and operates Be a Working Actor Studios, Idyllic Photography, and BerrySoup Productions. As if all of the above isn't enough talent for one person to embody, Mark is also a certified stock car racer, a gourmet cook, baker, and a master woodworker who handcrafts beautiful furniture for his family and home. He brands himself as a nice man with an edge. So let's meet this bad boy by welcoming Mark Atteberry to 19 Stories.
Hi, Cheryl. I'm stunned. I didn't realize I sound pretty good on paper, so that's shocking.
Well, this is your life, Mark. If it sounds good on paper, that's because it's pretty good in real life, and that's why you're here. There's so much to talk about. And first of all, I want to thank you for taking time to join me today, Mark. And how are you doing?
My pleasure. I'm doing well, doing really well.
If I didn't know you, I'd say that the brief part of this bio that I just read was the work of a top PR agency that was spinning a really good tale. But I have to say that I'm excited to be having a local boy on my podcast, which I think is a bit ironic given you're originally from Santa Rosa and now living in Los Angeles. And I'm originally from LA and living in your hometown.
And I love that. But see, you can take me out of Sonoma County, but you can't take Sonoma County out of me. So
no, not at all.
I'm there at heart.
I know your family still has the farm and vineyards, and we'll talk about all of that because I'd love to talk about your journey from milking cows to the bright lights of Hollywood. And there's a biography title for you somewhere in that.
From milking cows to milking words.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I was going to say that. I was trying to be a little bit kinder. But before we do that, and given the current COVID numbers throughout our state, I'm curious how you're able to work on set and what protocols are in place for doing so. As I understand, you're currently shooting several upcoming television series.
I actually just wrapped. I just wrapped a couple of weeks ago on a series. So yeah, I've been nonstop working since November, which is shocking. But I mean, in answer to your question, I'm very proud of our industry because of how we've handled it. We're very strict about following COVID standards. They are rigorous. We're tested every other day when we're working. Everyone has to wear masks. There are certain areas no one can cross into, areas that aren't theirs. Obviously, as actors, we're the only ones without a mask on, and only when we're shooting. They go right back on and include, face mask, plastic mask, the whole thing. So we do a really good job. I mean, I'm shocked at how few COVID cases there are, given how prevalent it's been, really, since all the way back in November. But we've done a good job. We've done a really good job.
It's amazing to hear that as an on-camera actor, you've been working since November, because for voice actors, that makes sense.
Right.
They're in their studios. They don't have to go into a studio, but you have to go on set and obviously interact when you're doing film and television. So that's really encouraging to know that such stringent protocols are being followed. And I'm curious if you could share anything about the shows or the roles that you just finished wrapping.
We're in the era of NDAs, as
Can you explain what that means
as
for somebody?
Jimmy Fallon so well said. NDA means non-disclosure agreement. Basically, what we do is we sign paperwork saying we will not say anything about the show. Now that we live in an era where people are dying to know what's going to happen and what shows are coming on and what the storyline is going and what's next, people want to pass that around. And so on our end, we're very strict about saying you can't say anything. You can't let your name get out there associated with things until it airs. So they're very, very protective about those things right now, and have been for several years. So I will say this, Ryan Murphy has been very generous to me lately. So I do have a few things in the works with him, which is fantastic. But it's a nice variety too. And I'll tell you what's interesting for me is things always go in trends. Suddenly you're going to see there's a lot of period things going on. And by period, I don't mean medieval period or the romantic period. No, there's 60s and 70s and 80s stuff is really strong right now. There's a ton of flashback stuff. And I actually have a theory on that if you want to hear it.
I
may be wrong about this.
No, I would love to, because first of all, that's like my favorite genre of film and television, because there's so much just richness to the history and the clothing and everything that needs to be recreated. So yeah, I would love to hear your theory on that.
A lot of polyester lately, and I can't tell you how happy it makes me. I love it. I've forgotten how comfortable polyester suits are.
Oh, that's so funny.
So yeah.
Said no one ever.
No, except me. I really, truly love polyester.
I'm just thinking it's the middle of summer. It's the middle of summer, Mark. It's like we're having a Sonoma County, like 80, 90 degree day. And I'm thinking polyester. But yes, I understand what the colors of the polyester.
All the flexibility. I can move better.
Yeah. Okay.
So, no, but my theory is we are in such a strong politically correct period where you've got to be very careful about everything you say and everything you do and everything you write. And I think going back to those periods gives the writers permission to say a little bit more, gives the studios permission to say a little more, be a little more upfront with some of the things they do. So I think it's attracting the creatives right now because of its freedom, given where we're at politically right now. So,
I would concur with that. I think that's really interesting you pointed that out, because I was watching, were you into The Indian Doctor on PBS at all?
No.
Really good series. And one of the things they touched on was kind of the whole racial issue with this Indian doctor. It's based on a true story. This Indian doctor and his wife coming to a small Welsh town in the 60s. So using kind of that platform to talk about some of the political and social things going on, which would be apropos to today. But as you say, people having to be so politically correct. Let's go back about 30 years and talk about your epiphany, if you will, from studying to be a preacher at Biola University to graduating with a music degree. And you chose one of the most renowned seminary schools in the country, and yet you went in a completely different direction and graduated with the music degree, then toured the country. So can you speak to what shift happened for you while in seminary, where you decided that music was your calling at that moment instead of ministry?
You know, it's interesting because I don't know that I would use the word shift. I don't know that there was ever a shift. It was more, our little church in Sebastopol, California was just a phenomenal little church. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And I went to a little camp called Mount Gilead, which is where I met someone who went to Biola. That's where I first heard about it. And I thought, I want to go there. I just want to go there. Because I came from such a, I don't want to say secular, but sort of secular upbringing in terms of not going to church a whole bunch, to then me getting involved in church and falling in love with that. And then saying, well, I want to go to Biola and take this the next step. I really did want to understand theology. I want to understand the Bible more. I want to understand history more. I mean, I'm fascinated. I'm driven by that stuff. So that's what prompted me to go down there. I had already gone to, several universities before. I started early on in an advanced study program. So I was eager to kind of get into that. And that's where I thought, maybe I want to do preaching. So I really got involved and took more and more classes. But music was my thing. I was always a musician from as early as I can remember. I remember getting a tonette when I was a young kid and falling in love with the tonette. So it started there. And then my grandmother was a wonderful keyboard player and wrote a lot of the hymns that we, to this day, sing in churches. So I think that was the inspiration for me. So starting young, was drawn into that. So I had both things going at the same time, which is why I love Biola. I was a music major there as well as taking all the theology courses. But as I was getting into the theology, it was not really, as we say, the doors were not open. I was not getting a lot of opportunities for whatever reason, where the doors were wide open with music. I was playing more and more. I was doing studio work. I was getting introduced to some pretty well-known people. So it was more of like, okay, I guess that's the direction I'm going because that's clearly where all the doors are open. And in this other direction, the doors aren't open right now. So that was kind of the way it happened. You know, it's being aware of God's leading, I guess, is really what it comes down to.
Yeah, it sounds like it was pretty organic. And for those who aren't aware, and I being one of them, what is a tonette?
A tonette is that little plastic mini flute you first start playing when you're a little kid.
I didn't know that was the name of it. Sounds like a group. Mark Atteberry and the Tonettes.
That's exactly right. In our polyester suits.
Yes. Here we're circling back to polyester. And Mark, I have to ask you because as I mentioned, I do know you personally, and I don't know that I've ever asked you though, why a trombone? Because everyone has their thing. And so why, like, out of all instruments, why a trombone?
I love that you asked this question. I've been interviewed so many times. No one's ever asked that. And it's actually something I'm kind of like passionate about. Trombone came about because in elementary school, there was a great band. We had a phenomenal little teacher named Mrs. Hesse. Or no, Mrs. Oh gosh, I can't think of her name all of a sudden. Yikes. It'll come to my head shortly. She had a little tiny trailer and everybody came in and she would look at your face and she would say, you have the lips of a clarinet player. You have the lips of a trumpet player.
Really?
Well, and I wanted to play trumpet. That was like, I really wanted to be a trumpet player.
And I could totally see you playing trumpet. Absolutely.
Well, and I walk in and she goes, you have the lips of a trombone player. And I went, well, but I want to play trumpet. She goes, no, you're not going to play trumpet. You're going to play trombone. You've got the lips of a trombone player.
Seriously.
And I was devastated, but I thought, okay, then I'll be a trombone player. And then I fell deeply in love with it because it's one of the that and violin, they say, are the two hardest instruments to play because you have too many variables and things going on that you've got to coordinate all at once to make a solid tone. So I actually fell in love with it because of the challenge. And then I kept challenging myself. And then it was my door to scholarships to get through college. So I truly fell in love with it. It was just a great instrument. And then I played jazz and played with some pretty big time people. And that's where I learned, this is a cool instrument. Unfortunately, it didn't have much of a future, which is why I started playing more and more keyboards because that did.
That's one of the reasons I asked you is because most people don't aspire to be a trombonist unless they really have a passion for that instrument. And it's interesting. She almost sounded like she was like a truth teller or a seer as to what people, that's remarkable that she would look at your mouth and say, this is your instrument. And lo and behold, you had an affinity for it and fell in love with it.
Well, I need to say though, years later, after I'd had success, I went back and I visited her and I loved her. I just loved her. We had the greatest little talk and I did ask, I said, is it true that you thought I had the lips of a trombone player? And she goes, yeah, it's kind of true, but we also needed trombone players. I was like, oh
my gosh, okay. That's wonderful.
Okay.
True. Now talk about a truth teller. Now she's telling the truth.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh. That is a fantastic story. Well, I'm glad that I asked you that then. I mentioned in your intro that while playing in orchestra pits for theater productions, that you got bit by the acting bug. And I would imagine that as a supporting musician, you observed some excellent productions. So Can you walk us through how you made that transition, or again, if I go back to the word epiphany, I guess it's my favorite word today, but into acting, as I imagine you had some sense that it was just about as easy a career to pursue as being a working musician.
You mean the epiphany for going from acting? Music to acting?
Yeah. Like you're sitting there in these, you had a successful career as a musician, really enjoying that. And then you go, okay, well, I want to go into, depending on how you look at it, the second or first hardest profession. I'll go into acting.
See, the upside of the bio, which I don't really pay attention to people talking about me when they introduce me, but the upside of my bio is it sounds like I've done a lot, which is true. I've been very, very blessed in this life, and I know it. The downside of that bio is I have a really hard time focusing on one thing. I like to do several things. It's just who I am by creation. And going all the way back to growing up, we lived in my grandpa had a giant dairy in Santa Rosa, and we had a huge hay barn, of course, because the hay was used to feed the cows during the winter. You used the corn that you grew that was put into silos mixed with hay. So massive hay barn filled with thousands of bales of hay. And so, of course, we would go in there and arrange it into a little stage and put on pirate shows and put on all these things. And I was always the one who wrote the shows, was the lead of the show, of course. If I'm going to write it, I'm going to be the lead.
You're right.
And then directed it. So, and all the kids in the neighborhood, and then, of course, our family and whatever would come see these shows. So that seed was planted early on of I love to just be, doing that sort of thing. That never went away. Even playing pit orchestras, it never went away. I love the performance bug. And so I did a couple of shows. I did a revival of Hair. I did Chicago in its initial, growth,
really?
where we were on stage. So, and I went, wow, I kind of like this. I kind of like being on stage, being part of this production, as opposed to down in that pit where no one ever sees you.
Yeah.
It just felt like I was more of the performance. And that I am a performer at heart. I really, truly do love that. I love having the ability to it's not control, but to influence people's emotions and people's thoughts and people's growth. I mean, I love that I can have a little piece of that influence as you do this thing. So that was always in my head. And then fast forward to music was going great. And then a friend called and said, hey, I'm at Biola, and we just got this amazing teacher who taught at Yale. He was the head of the master's department in Yale acting and has decided to come and go back to his small town roots. So he said, why don't you come back as an alumni and take some classes? And I did. And that's where it really got planted. I thought, I like this. I like acting. So I kind of dabbled and continued with music. Music died for me it died literally in 1994. I can say that for sure. But towards the end of the 80s, I started to kind of burn out a little bit, needing something new. That's when the acting was starting to kind of take place. So it was a slow transition. But after a tough tour in 94 with a band that was a pretty popular band, I couldn't take it anymore. I just needed to move on. So that was like, all right, now I'm acting. So that's kind of how the whole thing took place. But it was a really slow transition. And I slowly fell in love with acting as I studied with these great teachers and worked with some pretty famous and phenomenal actors.
Yeah. And I want to talk about some of the things that you've done. But if I can just ask you, do you ever pick up the trombone? Do you ever, when you say it died, that's a strong thing. I mean, it sounds like it's like you're dead to me. In all seriousness, is it just your passion died, your desire to be on the road? What was it about music that died for you?
It was a rough time in my life, and that was a part of it. I was tired of just the business as it was. And also, honestly, I played every single day of my life as a musician since as early as I can remember. I mean, with rare exception, I played every single day, whether I was practicing or actually playing. So I think I was just needing a break. Like I said, I did a rough tour, and I remember in New York, just sitting there at SIR Studios in a rehearsal going, yeah, I think I'm done. Mm. And I knew River Phoenix through circles at that time. And River's passing on Halloween night when we were playing in New York was somewhat instrumental with that, because I watched people who I cared for self-destructing. And I think it hit me. So there was a lot of things on that level. And also, I really did want to try music. But the funny thing is like you said, it was almost like you're dead to me. I didn't make a choice of going, all right, you're done. I'm never playing again. But I did put the instruments away and took a break and planned on doing nothing for the first time in my life, no music at all. And little did I know, it wasn't until 3 years ago that I finally picked up an instrument again. I literally did nothing with music all of those years.
Oh, wow.
Which is shocking because it was such a huge part of my life. So it wasn't intentional for me going, you're dead to me. It was just odd that I never went back. I intended to, but I just never did. And then when I picked it up, it was like, oh, I missed this. This is such a huge part of my life. What happened?
So did you pick up a trombone, or was it another?
I picked up the keyboards.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
I picked up the keyboards.
And you're continuing to play now?
Mostly. Yeah.
That's beautiful. I'm really glad to hear that. if anything, for your own outlet and edification. So,
Well, it's kind of a funny story because if you know Abraham Laboriel, Abe Laboriel's literally one of the greatest bass players alive. He holds the world's record for the most albums played on. And he's played with everybody from Michael Jackson to Tower of
yeah,
Power.
I'm familiar with him. And if our audience isn't familiar, then definitely look him up.
He's amazing.
Very prolific.
He's truly. And he's actually a truly amazing human being. Truly amazing human being. So he and I actually work out together. And we were talking, and he was on my case. He's like, how can you just stop music? You can't stop music. You know it's in your soul. And he said, and I said, Abe, it's a psychological, and it's true. I said, it's now psychological. I don't think I can do it psychologically after all these years. And he said, you go down to Guitar Center.
There's no plug. No plug.
Well, he said, and I dabbled on bass. And he goes, you start with bass. You go pick up a bass, and I want you to play. Yeah, he did. He said, I want you to play 2 notes. And I said, well, I actually have a bass at home. And he goes, go home, you pick up a bass, and you just play a couple of notes. And I did. I was like, it feels kind of good. So I went back, and he goes, did you play it? I said, I did. He goes, okay, next time I see you, you play an hour. And so I did. So Abe is responsible for me kind of coming, and I'm very thankful. I'm very, very thankful to be back because it's just weird for something to be such a huge part of your life to suddenly be gone. But it's almost like relationships. It's like you have a great relationship with somebody, and then for whatever reason it ends, and then years later you pick that relationship back up, and you're like, wow, why did we let this go? There's some really good stuff in this.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, and sometimes you don't, but when you do, and you revisit that and you think, oh my gosh, we were really close and had so much fun. What happened? And it's just life. But let's give a shout out to Abe. Thank you, Abe.
Thank you, Abe. I know.
Thank you, Abe. That's very, very cool. So let's talk about some of the film and television work you've done. If I were to recite your entire resume and IMDb credits, well, we can make this a 3-part. It's like, we could do that. But some of the key ones that you've done recently and within the past decade, one of the films that I know you're really proud of is you were the FBI agent in the hit Gone Girl.
Head of the FBI. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No. Yeah.
I'm not. I know. I totally demoted you. The head of the FBI. We got rank and file, buddy. Is the head of the FBI, a prosecutor in the series Blackish, Kirk Vogel in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and Brad in the new NBC series This Is Us, a technician in The Hulk, and the role that put you in consideration, I understand, for an Emmy nomination, which is Braden Walsh in the hit series For the People. And that's, of course, just to name a few, Mark. I'm not negating the rich diversity you have, because I know you've done some indie films, which maybe you can speak to, because I know that one of them opened the Sundance Film Festival, and you had a Best Actor Leading Role Award, Best Performance by an Ensemble Cast at the BAFTA Film Festival. So maybe you can speak to some of these roles, how they came to be for you, and what they meant for you in where you were at your career and how you were growing as an actor at the time.
That's a broad question.
I know we've got time. I know I asked you about 3 or 4 questions all at once.
Yeah, it all comes from the passion. I think that's any artist. It all starts with the passion. And I think if your focus is that, the things come, because it's not like I petitioned, or it's not like I wrote David Fincher 1,000 notes before he finally called me in for an audition. Not true at all. It was just, one thing kind of leads to another, and you just put your heart into the art itself. I truly, truly do love the art of acting. It's a fantastic art. And it's something that when it's done super well, people look and go, oh, I could do that. He's just being real. He's just being human. Mm-hmm. It's like, but it's incredibly, incredibly difficult to actually do that when you've got lines, when you've got marks to hit on the floor, when you've got to do certain specific things visually, when you've got to have an accent, when, add. There's a million things that kind of got to come together perfectly for it to feel very natural and very real. And then you've got to develop real chemistry between you and the other person, because that's what the camera sees the most. So it's not an easy art at all. And I love that. I love the challenge of it. So a lot of the roles just, little bit by little bit came my way. And you always start small. So it's, even the Hulk is not a big part whatsoever, but it was one of my first bigger roles. And it was obviously a big film. So that just came from working tirelessly, getting a couple of auditions, getting to know the casting director. Finally, the casting director calls me in for that. And by the way, funny story, because when I auditioned for it, it was just 3 of us. They got it down to 3 of us, and they brought us in. And Ang Lee was already working on something. I don't know if he was rehearsing or looking at a set but he was busy. So we waited 8 hours. The three of us waited on Universal Studio lot in a big studio. We sat and waited and waited. And then they gave us food. They catered, brought us food. I mean, it was like this crazy thing. Like, are we ever going to read with this guy? And then finally he came in and called us one in after the other. And I was the last of the third called in. And I hate this, but I love this. I was able to hear the other two guys' performance because they just took them around the corner. And so I thought, well, I'm not going to do that. And I'm not going to do that. So then I went in and I just kind of did the audition the way I felt it should have been done anyway. So, and then Aang took another hour and they held us there. It was a total of 8 hours by the time we went home. But he held us, and then his assistant comes out and he goes, hey, you don't get it and you don't get it. And Mark, you're the one that's getting it, which I thought was mean to the other guys.
The other two actors?
After 8 hours. To come in and do that.
I'm sorry. That's tacky.
It is. It was a horrible, and because I'm like, yay. Oh,
right.
I'm
exactly.
sorry.
You want to live into this moment. And then,
exactly.
Oh my gosh.
But I mean, that's the way you do it. And then, you get on set and you're learning and it wasn't my first role. I had some experience before on set, but it was the first kind of cool role. And then you just build, you go, okay, now I've learned some great things. Time to build on that. You go back to work and you train, you keep going, you do the next project and the next project and the next. So, and then I got into theater is kind of it's like what jazz is to the musician, theater is to the actor. It's a place where you get to go play and you get to try out because there's no rules. You just you're in charge. You do all the soloing. You do all the stuff. It's all about you. It's not about the writer like it is in television. It's not about the director like it is in film. It's about you, the actor. So theater was very helpful. I did a ton of theater and did get seen and known for some of the things I did. I got some good critical feedback and some good notice. So that would help get me jobs as well. It's a long, big old climb up a mountain, Sometimes there's rocks, sometimes there's easy slopes, sometimes, but it's a climb. It's quite a task.
Thank you for explaining that because, and the fact that you mentioned theater and how that's helped you. And I believe that's why so many casting directors love actors who've done theater.
Right.
Because you are so in the moment and raw and there's no retake, there's no fixing it in post. It's like you are fully present. And what you put out is what people receive. So thank you for talking about that a little bit. And I would love if you could walk us through, and I know no one day is the same, but if you could walk us through the day of a life of a working actor, and you touched on some of what it takes, but then how you came to be passionate about teaching fellow actors, because that's a very generous place to come from, Mark, how you came to be passionate about teaching fellow actors how to be present themselves to be a success in this business through your Be a Working Actor studios.
Well, I love what Samuel L. Jackson says about acting. He says, the actor's job is auditioning. The fringe benefit of our job is we get to act. And that's true. That's very, very true. So a lot of our job is just spent getting the script, going through that, memorizing it, getting it into our head, forming the character, trying to be real, and then doing the audition, and then doing the callbacks if there's callbacks, and then doing the meets if you're meeting the producers, the directors, whatever, until you finally get it. And then once you get it, then you finally get to act. That's the fringe benefit of it. So it really is about the task of it, the auditioning, the practicing, the getting better at it every single day. So you got to love that part. You really do. And like I said before, I love this art. It's just a beautiful, shockingly tough, but wonderful art. So that passion, I think, is what drove me to do the classes. To answer your second part of the question first, I love passing that on. And there are things I've learned along my journey. Like I've studied with some pretty great teachers, and each one of them had great things to say. And one of my favorite things to say is, because no one told me this, by the way, very, very few people ever articulated it. It took me a long time to figure out. One teacher I had where in London was pretty good at being vocal about it. But intellectual homework of breaking down a script, figuring out what your character wants, how does that work? What's the risk? What's all the circumstances, all that stuff. And then looking at it on an emotional level, like where are they at emotionally? How do I feel emotionally? Do I connect with that? How do I portray that? Have I ever been in that situation? So then you're connected intellectually to the character and what's going on, and you're connected emotionally to that character and to everything around you and every person around you. That's only the homework. So if you've done a ton of work there, then you get on set or you get into the audition or wherever, and you've got to let all of that go. Mm-hmm. And that's why I say it's like jazz to me, because you do tons of scales, tons of practicing, tons of everything else. And then when it comes in the moment, you got to let it all go and you just freeform it. You just let all of that homework go and you just connect to the person opposite you and you just let the energy and your chemistry between the two of you just go and see where this goes now. It might go a complete different direction than you ever rehearsed it, but that's fantastic. That looks great on film. So I love teaching people how to do that. The second thing I never learned in this business was it's impossible to be objective with ourselves, any field, not just acting, any field. It's impossible to be objective with ourselves. And I really appreciate the people that were objective with me. So I brought that to the game too, because there wasn't really a lot of people doing that, saying, hey, you know what? You're really good. You have a really good warmth about you that's very portrayable on film. Capitalize on that. You're definitely a best friend. You're definitely a girl next door. You're definitely et cetera, et cetera. Once you have that knowledge, it's easy just to go, oh, so I just do what I do. And that's how they perceive it. So I'll go for those kind of parts. You can start to develop a niche, a type, a whatever. So I love that aspect. And then going back to the first part of your question, a day in the life is, like I said with Sam Jackson, it's a lot of work just to stay plugged in and keep doing this. Keep doing it, keep doing it, keep doing it. My favorite days is when I get on set because I know I've got the part. I know I've got the support of people. And then it's just like, well, how great can I make this moment? And I don't care who you are. I talk to famous actors about this. Anytime you walk onto a set, whether it's the Warner Brothers set or the Disney or anything, it's like the child in you comes alive because you're like, oh my gosh, this is my workplace.
I get to play. Yeah.
At Warner Brothers Studios, at MGM, at Disney, you know what I mean? And they have placards usually on the studio sides of different things that have filmed there and different stars that have worked there. You're like, I am working on the same stage as Katharine Hepburn. I can't believe it. I mean, there's that little kid in you comes out. Yeah. So then it's like, okay, let the kid go, focus, have a great time, develop chemistry, be in the moment. Let's get a really great scene put down on tape. And I love that whole thing.
And you said it earlier about, people thinking that it's so natural. And the difference between a good actor and a great actor is you don't see any of that clicking in their head. When they're in the moment and their prep work is done, it's just magic to watch someone because you just think, how can they be that person?
Right.
How can they be that? They're so different from that as far as the celebrity or the public persona that we know. And then they don this character that just takes you into this world that you just can't imagine them doing. So thank you for talking about that. And I'm curious, given that you developed a curriculum for actors, is that what led you to doing photography, or did your photography come first?
No, photography came first. It's photography is something I've done my entire life. My uncle from the dairy actually was a really super talented photographer. So he got me into it. I mean, I was in a dark room when I was 6 years old, probably. So it's something I've done as a hobby my entire life. And when I made the transition from music into acting, at some point when I wasn't making the money anymore that I was making in music, I'm like, I kind of need a side job here. And I thought, you know what? I'll just kind of do photography. Let's see what happens.
Thus the Renaissance man, Mark. You've got to know that that's just not, people just don't come up with these ideas and they flourish and they turn into these fantastic avenues for them. So I just had to kind of chime in there of like, yeah, it's nothing for you, but it's kind of a big sense.
No, if you knew me and my hobby of photography, it just made sense to do it. But little did I know, within probably a year and a half of me jumping into that, I became LA's top headshot photographer, which is ironic to me because it's like, wait a minute, I want to be LA's top actor. I don't want to be.
I don't want to be there. Yeah.
And so I could care less. That's not true. It was fun, but it was ironic to me that happened. Like, this is my side gig. This is not the focus. But I did enjoy it, and I learned so much about the business from doing that. I got to know all the agents and a lot of the casting directors. I got to see what it's like to watch people from the other side of the camera. I got to see what works on camera, what doesn't. I mean, it was eye-opening for me as far as an actor. And it was just a fun gig. It was a lot of fun to do.
It's probably like being in a casting session because you're seeing what fears people bring before the camera and what confidence, et cetera. And you're still doing photography, are you not?
The answer is yes, but very little. I don't have a lot of time to do it anymore, but I did. Yeah, I enjoy doing it. So yes, I do it as time allows.
You're a working actor. So You've created the life that took you away from the thing that supported the life that you wanted and that you have now. And I just wanted to touch on people our age know what a dark room is, but in this age of digital photography where everything's so instant on our phone, dark room, you are referring to sitting in a room where you develop film, correct?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So talk a bit about BerrySoup Productions.
Well, BerrySoup Productions came into being because, like I said, I've done a lot of stage. I did a fair amount of plays when I was first getting into acting that I felt were right for me. And having burned through those, I wanted to do just some stuff purely for me. So I wrote a play, and honestly, it was mediocre at best. But I learned a ton of stuff. So then I wrote a second one, and that one went far better and actually got optioned by a pretty famous actor. So that kind of got me on the map with some of the writing. And I did enjoy that. I loved writing for myself because I know me and I love the stuff I could do. Because I was selling screenplays, I formed BerrySoup Productions. That's where that originally came from. And the hope was to go down the line and we all want to be sort of hyphenates. So actor / director / writer. I did write. I did actually get some notice. I did sell a few screenplays. I did get a piece into Slam Dance that was kind of a hit that actually got me a deal with Showtime. So that was the company I did that through. Unfortunately, we did a pilot that never did get picked up, so it never saw the light of day, but it's there. Then acting sort of took over entirely. And then I also got married. And so I wanted to just focus on that, just the marriage and acting for a while. Until a few years ago, I jumped back into writing. And the future for me, where I'm heading now, is I love content. I love being the person in charge of creating content. And I like having things that I can put myself into too. It's the old, Sylvester Stallone and Rocky story that every actor loves. Mm-hmm. Of course, I admire that as well and love to do that myself. So that's the goal right now. Actually, right after we're done talking here, I'm jumping back onto a rewrite. I've got a producer on a film that's got to get done. I'm on rewrite number 6. So that's got to get done pretty quickly. So BerrySoup is the company that basically all of that comes out of. I'm what they call, within the union, the Screen Actors Guild, I'm known as a middle-class actor. So I'm a working actor. I make my living acting. I'm not a famous actor, so I'm not a star. But I do, I'm known in town. I'm around. I'm certainly
part of
the... You have
a following, definitely.
I do. And I'm part of that small circle that does, a large majority of the work. I forgot why I brought that up. Something about the scripts. It's, the middle-class actor is, the joy of it is you can be somewhat obscure and have a career. I actually want to take this to the next level. I've done a couple of roles, even this year, where you're just kind of, I don't know that was really a role I love. I want to do stuff that I love. Mm-hmm. And the key way I can do that at my place in the career is to actually be putting content out there as well. So that's the future.
But what I really want to do is direct. So, Mark, there's a really important incident that I think is worth talking about. 3, actually. And that is you have broken your spine 3 times. I think it's safe to say it's devastating for that to happen to someone once and to recover and have the career you have.
Right.
And yet, how does that kind of injury happening multiple times, how have you gone on to have a successful on-camera career in light of 3 very devastating injuries to your body?
Well, this is an interesting question. And I'm actually glad you asked it because I don't talk about these things very often. There is a stigma in Hollywood and particularly on sets where no one really talks about negative stuff. Nobody wants to go negative. It's a very positive work environment. It's all about, probably to a fault. I mean, a lot of celebrities are
Pollyanna. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that is the case. So we just don't talk about negative. Most people don't know this in the industry. I am technically handicapped. So I broke at first my back, my spine, when in my late teens with church camp, with Hessel Church.
Wow.
So that's where it first happened. And I've had a ton of problems my entire life because of that. I was very fortunate because it should have killed me. And I've been told that repeatedly by doctors throughout my entire life. So I'm fine. I got over it. I've always had some limitations. And then I've had a series of other accidents within the last 10 years that re-injured some of the things and caused even more damage. I've had a whole series of surgeries, including disc replacement and all kinds of heavy duty stuff. So I've got a lot of artificial stuff inside my back. My neck, I broke in the earthquake of 94. Unbeknownst to me at the moment, I didn't know, but it was, my place collapsed in the earthquake of 94 here in Los Angeles. And I lost a good chunk of my possessions and everything else. It was a horribly traumatic moment. So that's the 3 times that it's been broken. But it's left me with a difficult situation because I can't do a lot of things. In 2019, I got fired 3 times, twice right before we shot and once on the first day of shooting, because I wasn't able to physically do what they wanted me to do. So a lot of physical things I can't do, even as simple as running. I can't run, and I'm a healthy person. I take very good care of myself.
Yeah, you do.
And I love running. So I'm limited to a lot of the things I can do. I even was on, I can't say, I was on a show and this is recently. And there's a moment where a girl is freaking out and I'm with a team of people and I reach in to kind of hold her down as she's freaking out. And then I have to inject her. But in order to do that, I had to bend down. I had to hold this and she was really freaking out. To her credit, she's a great actress. And then I had to inject her with this solution. So as we're doing this whole thing, my back popped and I was paralyzed. I was completely paralyzed. And I had been paralyzed from some of the injuries and eventually got through it with things like physical therapy and surgery, obviously. So it's not unfamiliar, but I was stuck and I was in horrendous pain. And literally,
what did you do?
Well, I fortunately, it was the last take of a particular camera setup. So they said, all right, they say actors, go to holding. So we go back to holding. I couldn't barely walk. I walked like Tim Conway's character as an old man. If anyone remembers back in the 70s, like tiny little teeny steps to get there. I couldn't sit. I was stuck and I didn't know what was going to happen. I thought I was going to be end up at the hospital because that's happened before. And thank God, literally, thank God, little by little, it took over an hour to do this next camera setup to shoot from a different angle. Through that hour, I was able to walk around and it loosened up a little bit. And I eventually was okay to finish. And we went on for another 5 hours to shoot. I went home and, level 10 pain and on the verge of passing out. It was so bad. But that's the limitations I have to deal with. Fortunately, or very unfortunately, someone on that particular set was exposed to COVID. So we shut down the set for a period of time anyway. So I was allowed, I had time to heal. And when we came back, I was able to finish fine, but it's difficult. I don't feel sorry for myself. I think every single person in this earth has their own set of limitations, their own things that cause them to have hurdles they've got to overcome to do this. It is hard. I mean, I want my instrument to be freed up. It's a very physical art. So I'd like to have full potential of my physical instrument to do the things, to go ahead and run, to go ahead and jump off a little, I was supposed to jump off a chair one time. I can't jump off a chair. So I would love to be able to do those things. I'm limited. So then I have to be very picky and choosy. And my agents understand this, to only accept certain things, and even with all the certain things. And one time at the beginning of this year, I did a scene where I dropped my pencil as I'm sitting in a chair and I bent over to pick it up. And I know in my brain that there's a huge risk in that, but the camera saw me drop my pencil. So I thought, I'm going to try it. I bent over and sure enough, I got stuck. The pain was so severe, I could barely move. And I had to finish another 6 hours and that particular day I had a 2-page monologue. And that's 2 minutes of nonstop talking. So your brain shuts down when your pain level's that high. It was a very difficult day. So it's interesting. It's interesting to have that in that broken tool in my toolbox.
And speaking of tools, it's kind of segue into my next question, but I appreciate you sharing that, because in addition to everything that you mentioned before about training and everything that it takes to pursue this work, you show up and, like you say, everyone's got their sack of rocks, but to have something physical like that, which affects your instrument, your speech, your breathing, the way you move, it is absolutely remarkable that you have the career that you have. And I would imagine with that you face a certain amount of fear during all of this. And yet I'm curious.
I do. Yeah.
And who wouldn't? I mean, really, when you drop a pencil and you think, am I going to be debilitated for the rest of the day if I go pick that up? So I'm curious what tools you rely on to get you through this, or if it's your faith kicking in, if you will, that pulls you through.
Well, it's both. It really is both. I mean, the glory of my faith is that I know everything happens for a reason. So it's not like, oh no, why is this happening? This is disaster. It could no. There's a deep founded belief in me that this is happening for a reason. God's fully in control. It doesn't matter. Yes, it may seem out of control, but you're okay. So there's that aspect to it. But at the same time, I've had a couple of great teachers that are just like, there's a famous story with Sharon Stone working with Roy London, who I did briefly study with. Sharon apparently was doing a scene and she went into this tantrum and started screaming. It was like all of a sudden, like lines being said that aren't even a script. And we're looking like, what in the world's going on? She threw a chair and it hit the wall and she starts screaming at the top of her lungs. And Roy stopped and said, Sharon, what are you doing? And she said, I'm just so frustrated right now because I don't feel like I'm even connected. I don't feel like I'm not feeling my scene partner. I'm out of control with the lines. It's all just falling apart. And he goes, well, have you ever felt like that in life? You ever felt like you're just out of control and there's no connection? She goes, of course. And he goes, good. And so does your character. Keep going. And it was eye-opening because that's what you do. And the really interesting thing is, as an actor, I'm responsible for bringing life to a character that's written on a page. And there's no one out there that can say, well, this character never has back pain. No, this character, all my characters have back pain. They all do. And as you and I have talked about previous to this, I also have terrible dyslexia. I had it my entire life. So, which is why I don't do a lot of voiceover, as we talked about, which is thankfully, I leave that to people like you that are great at it. So,
and yet, Mark, if I may interject, so much, but you have to memorize a script, and that's reading. How do you memorize as you mentioned before, a 2-minute monologue when you have a brain? It's not a deficiency. It's the dyslexia that you're aware of that you've obviously been able to overcome. But how do you compensate for that to do that?
It's not that I can't read. I can read. It's just the letters
of course.
And the words get shifted. So I have to pay attention. Like, what is that actually? Oh, I know what that word is. Like there'll be those moments. So when you're doing voiceover and they throw the script in front of you and they go, okay, we need this now. Crank it out. The people that I'm blown away is the people that do audiobooks. Holy smoke. That would be, that's my nightmare. To put me in a room and say, you are not leaving until you finish this book would be my nightmare. So I can read, I can get through things. However, I can't do it flawlessly just sitting down the first time. So it just takes me a little bit more work and I memorize it. But I've always relied on memorization. It's a lot of actors back in the day. There was a period, 80s, 90s and whatever, when you audition on camera, you were allowed to have the script in front of you. And even in the 80s, you were still allowed to look at the lines and then look up at the camera and say it. Those days are gone. They expect everything to be pretty much camera ready now. And that's fine because I've really been doing that since the 80s, since I can't rely on my reading skills.
And yet there's script changes. You have someone coming in and saying, we did a rewrite, do this.
Yeah, but anybody who's dyslexic or non-dyslexic is thrown into that crashing bus.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
okay.
You literally will get, or you work with people like Aaron Sorkin, which I've done. And Aaron's like, my very first day on Newsroom with Aaron, I was doing a scene and I'm saying my lines and I said, in the middle of the sentence. And Aaron, not even the directing, he's like, cut, stop. Don't you ever say, between my words again. They're written musically. They're written specifically. It needs to flow that way. I'm like, okay. All right. No more ums. So there are those situations where it's got to be word perfect and phrase perfect, but that challenge is there whether you're dyslexic or not. It may take me a little bit longer to read each word and get through each sentence to memorize it. But memorization, some people are great at it. Some people are not. I'm kind of in the middle. I'm decent at it, but it ain't easy.
Stock car racer certified. How does that go hand in hand with having broken your spine 3 times?
Well, that's not, I'm a master of it. That's just something, that was a bucket list item. My dad was a mechanic. My dad actually built stock cars. He built demolition derby cars. He built all kinds of crazy stuff. He was a hot rod addict. himself. So I grew up around that stuff. He had one of 2 service stations in my little town of Sebastopol. So I grew up around cars and all that. And I was fascinated by it, and I love speed. And I don't have a lot of fear. It's the one thing about me. I don't have fear of heights. I've parachuted. I don't have fear of speed, of crashing. So I love that sort of thing. So it's something I've wanted to do my entire life. And I got an opportunity to go ahead and go to a school, take these courses and learn to be a stock car driver. So I did. Actually, as I'm talking to you, directly in front of me is a picture of it. It sits in my office right in front of me, just to kind of remind me, because it's one of the funnest things I've ever done in my entire life. And apparently I'm pretty good at it. So,
well, of course you are, Mark. Of course you are. I mean,
I think it has to do with the fearless thing, though, because I took the courses with a good friend of mine who left the military, who had, pretty fearless guy, but it actually terrified him because you're going super fast and it does feel like the car is going to lose control all of a sudden and fly off the track. Mm-hmm. You really feel like that, but it didn't scare me. It scared him to death. So I think there is a certain fearlessness that's needed in that. And for whatever reason, I don't have a lot of it.
Probably serves you really well in the profession you're in, because so much, and you could probably speak to this obviously more than I can, but just the fear that people walk in with to even do an audition. And if you have a fearlessness about, hey, I'm here for the ride, I'm going to enjoy this, that's probably served you really well.
Well, no, Cheryl, going back to the classes and a lot of this, because I do speak a lot about acting in different circles and all across the country. I get these cool little trips where I get to go talk about it. But one of the things I love talking about, because it's apropos in life, not just acting, is at some point we got to kind of look at that fear and change it from a negative thing to a positive thing.
Yeah,
because nerves, people complain all the time about nerves. It's like, well, I'm like literally shaking, like the page is shaking in front of me when I'm auditioning, and they're going to see that and they're going to know that I'm an amateur. It's like every celebrity I've ever worked with, every single celebrity I've ever worked, and I've worked with a ton and huge ones, they all get nervous. They all have that same anxiety, but you just change it to, oh, good. The nervousness is there. Great. Then I'm ready to go. I'm in that heightened state of art. I'm ready to go. So you got to turn it into a positive. So I like it. I think it's, and I didn't used to be that way, but I do like now, I love walking into an audition for something. I've been up for a couple of really big series regular roles this year, and it's tense when you're sitting there on Zoom now in front of, 40 network people that are going to make the decision of whether you're going to have a tremendous paycheck or no paycheck. There's a huge amount of anxiety that comes into the works. And I love to go, yep, there it is. Cool. Anxiety's there. Let's do it.
That's fantastic.
Something about that.
There really is, because first of all, it's energy that if you fuel it in the right direction, it can be a really positive thing. So I'm really appreciate you speaking about that. And,
I'll tell you quickly too, if I was talking with a group of people with Alan Alda. Alan, I think it was in late 70s at this time, and we were all talking about acting and the anxiety of it and stuff. And he goes, and someone said, Alan, are you nervous when you're on a set? And he goes, oh my gosh. He goes, that first day, I'm almost wetting my pants. I'm so terrified. I'm scared I'm going to blow the lines. I'm scared they're going to fire me. I'm scared they're going to figure out I'm not a good actor. I'm like, Alan Alda?
Oh, wow.
Who's had many, many Emmys and, huge career for decades and decades. Yeah. It never goes away. That's the interesting thing. So that helps to know that.
It's also kind of a sign that especially someone of his level of success and caliber doesn't take it for granted, that he's always fully aware that he's there to do a job. As much as it is a craft, he's there to do a job and to do it well so that you can be called back. If you had to pick one of your greatest achievements, professionally or otherwise, what would it be?
Oh, man. I mean, my entire life revolves around my faith. So the greatest achievement was probably, yes, going to seminary, but even before that, it's giving my life to God and going, it's got to be about good stuff. It can't be just about me. Mm. That's number one, but it's, that's hard because it's just different eras had different highlights and things. I'll tell you one thing that I love, and it came through acting, was one of my greatest experiences ever. And I learned about the power of art and just being part of that machine is I did, Rabbit Hole was a Pulitzer Prize winning and Tony winning play on Broadway And when it came to LA, I was in one of the first productions out here, playing it's a story about a husband and wife whose young boy is killed. He's run over by a car. And how do you deal with that? It's brilliantly written. It's got every tone and, of the human emotion in it. But it was one of the last performances, and there's a third scene in. It's me and my wife sitting on the couch, and I'm trying to get through this, and I'm trying to get her to reconnect, and I'm rubbing her shoulders. And so she's like going, where is this going? I'm not ready for this. And it just disintegrates. And so she leaves the room, and I sit down and I turn the TV on and I put in a tape of my son, and I'm watching this, these old clips of my little boy, and I lose it. I break down and I sob. And oftentimes during that scene, I would hear people throughout the audience also sob. And one woman started sobbing fairly loudly, and it didn't stop through the entire play. And you could tell that she wasn't obnoxious. She was definitely trying to stifle it, but she was towards the front, and I could hear her through the entire play. And so at the end of the night, we finished the play. It was a good run, good night. And the stage manager was like, can you come talk to somebody? They really want to talk to you. And I said, sure. And it was this woman, and she apologized profusely for crying. She said, but can I just hold you? And I said, of course you can hold me. And she hugged me so tight. And then she sobbed all over me. I mean, for a long period of time. And then she backed up and she looked me in the eyes and she goes, thank you so much for helping me get through something that I've not been able to get through yet. And I lost it. And then I was like moved. And she said, I'm sorry, I've got to go. And she left. That's all. I don't know what it was. I have no idea. But I was me putting my whole self into that role and that play and that cast and that night somehow touched this person's life in a very profound way. And I was like, there's value to this. There's really good value to this. And it gave me even more purpose as an artist. Because I mean, people think, actor, what a ridiculous career. No, there's actually real dignity and real strength to it. There's a real purpose for artists.
Absolutely. Where would we have been this past year and a half, even though so many artists, especially performing artists in theater and music, et cetera, have been affected? Right. But where would we have been without being able to turn on a Zoom concert or turn on a film or a television show?
Right.
Or, even
let's be honest, even Jesus was a master storyteller. So it's like the power of those stories, the power of all of it is incredibly profoundly helpful. It can also be destructive too. So we got to be careful.
Well, it's just like the opposite side of adrenaline and fear is channeling it in the right place, right, which you so beautifully expressed. And conversely, then, do you have a less than successful time that informed you of the next right step to take?
That's a really good question. I have been part of, like I said, there's a downside to art as well. You got to be very careful. I've been part of certain projects where when I got done, I was like, oh, I don't know that I really want to be part of that. I don't know I want my life to be used by that particular message, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely.
This is silly, and this is going to sound really fluffy in terms of an answer. There is I make a point of not cussing. I make a point of being pretty conservative in my choices as far as the roles and the things I'll do. Although I've played serial killers, I played rapists, I played all kinds of stuff. But the message is what's most important to me, because you can't have good without having evil. So I'm okay with that part. I just got to be very careful. But it's funny because this is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. I auditioned for a large part in a big, huge upcoming television show that's going to be big. It's already getting a big buzz about it. And I did not get the large role, but I was offered a small role because the showrunner, the creator, and the director actually said, we just like you, because we've worked together before. I said, you want just a small role? And I went, yeah, of course I do. Why would I say no?
No, I'm good.
And I didn't know what it was until I got to wardrobe and saw my outfit, and they gave me the script for the first time. And I looked it up and I had to laugh. It's not that big of a role. It was definitely a smaller role, but in it I cuss, but it's a true story. And so it's the true words. I'm like, I'm okay with this. I'm okay with this one. So the trailer for it came out a few days ago, and this may tune people into what it is, even though I'm still not allowed to talk about it, even though I'm in the trailer. But they took the one line where I just cuss, and it's actually a pretty funny line, and it's right there prominent in the trailer. And I'm like, oh boy, here comes my family. Here come the room. And sure enough, word spread. People saw it. Some of my family members are like, what are you doing? Some of my friends, some of my conservative friends, what are you doing? Like, well, welcome to Hollywood. I don't regret it. That's a true statement. That's actually did happen in real history. But it's funny because I make choices to stay fairly conservative. I don't know that fully explained. That's not something I deeply regret, but it is ironic that, of course, the one time I do choose to do something, it shows up.
It was really more, and I think you answered it in a different way. I mean, it was more like, when have you been less successful that informed you the next right step? Well, if you're offered these parts that, whether it's gratuitous language or whatever, it's informing you, no, unless it is historically correct or relevant to this script, this is what I'm hearing you say, that it's not something that you're interested in doing.
Yeah.
And those are choices, and those are really, it's important, I think, as artists to know, where are your boundaries? Where do you draw the line?
Right.
Because it's your body of work.
Well, and this is one of my messages to Hollywood. It's just like, do not let someone make you do something you don't want to do. Why would you do that?
Exactly.
You have the responsibility and you have the right to say no.
And a choice. So, it's always a
yep.
choice. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
What makes you hopeful?
Well, God first. It's going to sound funny, but it's little kids at play and then also big kids at play. Like there's been a couple times recently where I've just been able to go and have some fun, some just flat out. That actually gives me hope. And we've got a lot going on with Afghanistan and all kinds of things right now in our world and civil unrest and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of pretty tough things going on. And it's nice to know that can still go on, and yet we can still play. You can still have a little fun, still have a good conversation. We can still encourage each other through it all, and maybe even make people laugh through it all. That actually does give me hope. And I'm an avid Bible reader, so the Bible is really good at giving me hope.
Thank you, Mark, for sharing that. And I would imagine that's what also brings you joy. That was my follow-up question to that. Yeah. Laughter right now is so needed. And like you said, little kids and big kids, that's a really great visual. So thank you for sharing that. And this is one of my regular questions, but there couldn't be a more apropos question for you. If there was a soundtrack to your life, what would be on it and why?
Oh, man. My soundtrack is going to be a giant Spotify playlist.
Okay.
It really covers it all. My life covers every genre of music, and I've played it all. I mean, I started with symphonic and jazz, and then I moved into rock, and then I got into country for a period, and then so it kind of goes the full gamut. That's such a hard question for me because I like it all. I mean, I really do kind of like. I'm blown away by. I just heard some music from Aboriginal music recently that was just like so different than anything I've ever heard. And I'm just sucked into this stuff. Like, that is so cool. So
a very eclectic soundtrack.
Very eclectic. Hey, take a look at my iTunes. Look at the list of things that I actually have purchased. It literally is all over the map.
Well, I think that's very fitting for you, Mark, because as I don't use the term Renaissance man lightly, but in the true essence of the word, you are that, and that you have an eclectic life, you have eclectic talents. The fact that you have such an interest in a variety of music and film and art and music, and I mean, it just makes sense. It's kind of the whole essence of who you are. And so I guess the most important question is, how can people get a hold of you?
Well, if anyone's interested in getting a hold of me, I have 3 websites. If you're just curious about me, it's Mark Atteberry, MarkAtteberry. I'm sure it's on your podcast. MarkAtteberry.com. There's just, I need to update it, I will say, but there is just information about me, my teaching stuff, if you are interested. And I do speak, in fact, tomorrow I'm speaking, I think, at a very relevant topic on Clubhouse. With a good friend of mine that's a very, very successful and known psychotherapist, Lisa Porter, is Lise, Lise Porter. We are talking about loneliness in Hollywood because depression and loneliness are rampant here. It really are. All of that stuff, all of my teaching, all of my speaking is going to be on beaworkingactor.com. Obviously, that's more relevant to actors, but beaworkingactor.com is filled with tons of, I even have a resource page that it took me years to put together of everything you need to know about headshots, about resumes, about demo tapes, about all kinds of stuff. There's a large resource of information I put together for that. And then Idyllic, IDYLLIC, photography is my photography. I don't do a lot of it, but I still do headshots as time allows because it's so fun. It really is a blast.
And you're a fantastic photographer.
Thank you.
Yeah, you did my headshots back in the day.
Did.
You did, and I still
and had fun.
Yes, you are very generous with your time, your information, your being. Mark Atteberry, I really appreciate this time, and I will have all of this information in the show notes. And I did see that upcoming Clubhouse. I might even join you because it's not just in Hollywood, but really worldwide now with the pandemic, the loneliness that's affecting people. So I really hope people tune into that. I wish this podcast was going to be on or launched already, but they can join you in future Clubhouse rooms and discussions. So thank you so much, Mark, for taking time out of your day. And I know you have a rewrite to do, so I won't take up any more of your time. But when we can use technology to bridge the gap of time and distance, well, not so much time, we're on the same time zone, but distance and spend a little time chatting. It's a real blessing. So thank you, Mark. I
get excited knowing you're in Santa Rosa right now. My heart's there.
Any place you want me to go for you? I mean, is there a cow that needs to be milked?
Well, thank you, no, because your husband and I have talked about it relentlessly.
Yes, I know. Why don't you could give that place a plug.
That's it. Chicago pizza.
That is the bomb for pizza. If anybody's coming up to Sonoma County, Old Chicago Pizza in Petaluma, they're not a sponsor, but you know what? They're a local business, and certainly love to give shout outs to local businesses because they deserve it.
I love their pizza.
Yeah, well, pizza. Next time you come up here, the treat's on us. And until then, I just hope that you stay happy and healthy. And
you too.
Yeah, we're doing good.
Well, thank you, Cheryl. This was a lot of fun and absolute pleasure to do.
You're very welcome. Thank you. I'd also like to thank the following news outlets for the use of their clips in so aptly painting the picture of the fear that we're facing during this pandemic. BBC, PBS, Now This, UNESCO, and Some Good News. I especially want to thank Joel and Luke Smallbone, otherwise known as the Group for King and Country, for allowing me to use an excerpt of their song Together, which could not be a more hopeful and inspiring song for such a time as this. Finally, I'll leave you with the following from Proverbs 23:18. Surely there is a future, and your hope will not be cut off. Thank you again for joining me today. Feel free to offer feedback or a story idea at 19Stories@soundsatchelstudios.com. Visit my website at soundsatchelstudios.com, via Instagram at Cheryl Halling VO. I look forward to sharing more stories on the next episode of 19 Stories from Fear to Hope. Until then, stay healthy and hopeful.
Together with our differences, together we are bolder, braver, stronger.